To Saturday night at the movies. My name is Elwy Yosh. Our program tonight is a high-stepping, heel-kicking treat that brings together some of the greatest talents of the New York stage and Hollywood. Our theme is simply a landmark Broadway musical, and our film is the incredible Oklahoma. It's an extravaganza that runs nearly 2.5 glorious hours, and it's our one movie of the evening. Oklahoma first began as a 1931 non-musical play called Green Grow the Lilacs. It seemed destined for obscurity until the Theater Guild persuaded composer Richard Rodgers and lyricist Oscar Hammerstein to adapt it. It was a risky venture, since Westerns were not exactly the usual source of inspiration for stage musicals. Oklahoma was also the first collaboration for the famed songwriting team that I've just mentioned, who decided to avoid standard musical comedy approaches in which numbers were abruptly thrown in simply to keep things moving. Instead, they let the presence of song and dance be dictated by developments of plot and character. The result was a cohesive and uplifting classic directed by Reuben Mamoulian that opened on Broadway in 1943 and ran for something over 5 years. The 1955 film adaptation was religiously faithful to the stage production, with Rodgers and Hammerstein overseeing the entire shooting to preserve the stage production's integrity. Fred Zinnemann directed a fine cast, including Gordon MacRae, Charlotte Greenwood, Gloria Graham, Gene Nelson, Rod Stiger, Eddie Albert, and Shirley Jones in her first film appearance. Agnes DeMille, choreographer of the Broadway production, brought her skills to the film version, and her expertise is in full evidence in a splendid ballet sequence featuring dancers James Mitchell and Bambi Lynn. But now, before we settle down to this evening's feature, we'll hear a few words from a number of people, including actors Rod Stiger and Eddie Albert, singer-actress Shirley Jones, and our resident critics, Charles Champlin, Leonard Malton, and Stephen Rebello. Want to start with your early career. Want to know how come you came to New York in the beginning, and then perhaps something of how you first met Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein.
Well, they were sort of synonymous. I actually came to New York on a summer holiday with my mother and father. I was 18 years old.
18?
18, actually 17 to be exact. And I had had a year of the Pittsburgh Playhouse School of Drama, and that's my home near Pittsburgh. And I happened to meet a pianist that I knew from Pittsburgh, and I started to sing. This was just a week in New York, you know, and I started to sing with him. He said, listen, I have an agent who's a friend of mine. I'd like to introduce you. He said he may be doing some summer things. Let me see what he thinks of your voice. And I sang for him. And he said, you must stay in New York. He said, they're holding auditions. Rodgers and Hammerstein have 3 shows playing on Broadway now. 3 at the same time. And every week they have what they call an open audition just to replace the chorus people who were leaving. You know, of course, they'd been running for years. And he said, I'd like to, you know, have you sing for them. I said, but I want to go back to school, and at that point I was going to go to college, and I had made up my mind what I wanted to do. I'd been, of course, singing in small theater productions, and always singing. Singing was sort of a gift and was God-given, and I was
right from
like
a baby
talking.
almost.
Yes, exactly right. So he said, no, I want you to sing for them. So I went to one of the open auditions, and I sang for the casting director. I mean, there was a line around the corner waiting to sing. It was that kind of a thing. You know, they call it a cattle call, we call it in the business. And I sang for the casting director, and he said, Miss Jones, would you mind waiting? Mr. Rodgers just happens to be across the street rehearsing his orchestra for Oklahoma, which was about to go out on the road on another tour. And he said, and he always liked to conduct his orchestra before they left town. And he said, I want him to hear you personally. So he called Richard Rodgers over. I sang for Richard Rodgers. Imagine, this was my first audition in New York.
And you're 17.
Yes, exactly. And at that point, Richard Rodgers said, Shirley, could you wait 20 minutes? I'm going to call Oscar Hammerstein at home. I want him to come and hear you. Now, it was a Thanksgiving weekend, and my pianist, conductor, was going home for the holiday. And he said, Shirley, I can't wait. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't wait. I have to catch an airplane. And Richard Rodgers at that point said, well, we have a full orchestra across the street. You can come and sing with the orchestra.
What?
Exactly.
All this happening in one afternoon?
My first audition, first week in New York.
And all in one day?
All in one day. So I, of course, was a nervous wreck, and I said,
I guess so.
I said, you don't mean it. I said, but what'll I sing? And he said, do you know the score of Oklahoma? And I said, well, I know the music, but I don't know the lyrics. And he said, well, we happen to have a score here. I went across the street. I was at the Broadway Theater. I went to the St. James Theater. Soon arrived Mr. Hammerstein, and I stood knees shaking on the stage and sang most of the score of Oklahoma for those two gentlemen.
Right.
Right, my very first audition, my first week in New
Went
York.
through the whole show.
Exactly.